inside of Fabric, the foundation is this OneLake. And then in Fabric, we have different areas we can go to, including Power BI. So the way this works, we go into app.powerbi.com. And if you go at the bottom left, you'll see Fabric is made up of several different components. Power BI is the reporting component, but Fabric adds in other tools like Data Factory and some of the other tools Razvan mentioned. Data Factory, the main ones we're going to go through today are Data Factory, Synapse, and these three Synapse components: data engineering, data science, and data warehouse. We don't have time today to go into Activator or some of the other solutions that involve real-time data. We're going to focus on what it takes to build a dynamics-oriented report and then send it to an end user. So the first step is usually Data Factory. This is a tool that gives us the ability to bring data from outside sources into Fabric. We're also going to talk about a lakehouse and warehouse. In Fabric, you store data in either a lakehouse or a warehouse, and that's where our data is going to reside. There's also the ability to use notebooks and other tools like pipelines. In Synapse Data Science, you might do experiments or use other tools for machine learning models. There's other tools available in Fabric that we won't get into today. And then also there's the ability to create a warehouse. A warehouse is a little bit different than a lakehouse. We'll be able to show some key differences during the demo. So first of all, I'm going to walk through this workspace today in the demo. I have a example workspace set up called Fabric. In the Power BI world, there's this Fabric, there's a workspace concept. The workspace itself gets assigned a license. So this workspace is right now set up to a trial license for Fabric. Every Power BI workspace you're using would normally have a pro license. You can enable Fabric by turning on a trial or licensing a capacity to use the Fabric tools. Once that's available, we can start using the Fabric tools to build our own warehouse. In this example workspace, I've set up several folders here that we're going to go through. The first folder here is what we call bronze. This is our raw data layer. So inside of here, I've got different lakehouses that have different sets of data. So here I've got a bronze layer. I've got a layer that shows some data coming from Dataverse. Then we're going to go through building a silver layer. The silver layer is where we have our cleansed data. In this example, I chose a warehouse as the repository for my silver layer. Then we have a gold layer. The gold layer is the next step in our medallion architecture, where we have model data. And then we're going to go through the semantic model and the reports. The semantic model is what used to be called a data set in Power BI. So this is the first step that would be similar to what you would use in a Power BI Pro instance. And then we have our reports. The other elements of Fabric are we need tools that can move data from our data sources to our lakehouse or warehouse, and then also to clean up the data and move it into our data model. So we have the ability to do data flows. They have this data flows generation 2, our data flows that use the Fabric capacity. Data flows also exist in standard Power BI. Then we also are going to look through notebooks. Notebooks use the Spark engine, and those are primarily used to move data within a lakehouse. And then we'll also talk about pipelines. Pipelines are part of the Azure Data Factory, and they can be used to move data as well. So first, let's talk about the bronze layer. The bronze layer, this is an example of a lakehouse with raw data. The bronze layer allows us to have tables, and these tables are data that we've loaded from one of our data sources. In this example, I have a few different tables I've chosen from Business Central that I can review. So here I've got a customer ledger entry, the customer list. In the demo later, we're going to go through building a customer statement report using this data. So I've got the customer table, I've got the customer ledger table, and I've got the detailed customer ledger table that I'm going to use to build a customer statement later in the demo. This data is being brought in from Business Central. I can also get data from other sources. So I can say I can upload files, I can run a pipeline or another data flow to get the data. I can also run a shortcut. If I have data somewhere else, I can shortcut it into here. So I'm going to add a shortcut to my OneLake, and I'm going to bring in data from my Dataverse environment. So I pick Dataverse, and any table I have available in my Dataverse, I can shortcut in. So let's say I wanted to know from my CRM system, what are my CRM accounts? I can create this. It's going to create a shortcut to data from another source. In this case, the Dataverse accounts table.
And this
This
will
looks like,
allow us to combine data from BC with data from C, so different environments brought in the
yep,
same branch.
yep. In the background, these are stored in that Parquet format. So in the Lakehouse, the background is file storage, but we see them in Fabric as tables. So I'm able to explore the data, see all the fields from any of these tables. These tables with the numbers are examples of Business Central tables. This would be an example of a Dataverse table. The way this works inside of Dataverse, I'm going to go there next. There's a tool in Dataverse that allows you to link to Microsoft Fabric. When you do this option, when you set up this link, it replicates all the data from Microsoft Fabric or all from Dataverse into Microsoft Fabric. For finance and operations customers, they can also link F&O tables into Dataverse
So
or
using the
into
same,
Fabric.
yes, using the same tool. So
Yeah,
you can have data from FNSEM and a C using link to Fabric.
right. So what this looks like is once I do that connection, it creates a separate read-only lakehouse. And this, for example, creates a shortcut or a link to all the tables from Dataverse. So any table or any field I want to see from the Dataverse becomes available. And then I can shortcut it into my lakehouse. So here's my account table shortcutted in. Now, for Business Central users, there is no link available through Dataverse, but we have started implementing this tool that's available. It was created by Microsoft called BC's ADLS. The only downside to this is not officially supported by Microsoft, so any sort of issues may have to troubleshoot on our own. But this allows you to export data from inside of Business Central out to Fabric or Synapse. So in this example, I'm using this export data lake storage to export data into a lakehouse. So here I'm saying go to the workspace and the bronze lakehouse, and I can add additional tables. So the edit here, if I wanted to add an extra table, and um, let's add the sales order table. So I'm going to add sales header. This is going to create the sales header table. I can add this, and then I can say enable all the fields that I'm allowed to export. Any sort of calculated fields can't be exported, but any standard fields can. So I'll do another one. This is going to allow me to create two new tables. And then I would export these tables. So first I have to export the schema, information about the tables, and then I'll export the tables themselves next. So when I run these two steps, it's going to move this data from BC into the lakehouse. So next in the lakehouse, I'll see right now I added two new tables. So if I refresh the lakehouse, I'll now see two new tables exist, sales header and sales line. I'm now in a notebook. This is a Spark notebook that's also run in Fabric. So within the same interface, I can run a Spark notebook that will transform this data. So what Business Central did is it dropped files in CSV format into um, into our lakehouse. I'm going to now run this Spark notebook, and it's going to convert these files into tables. So if I refresh this, it'll take a moment to run. It's going to run a series of Spark code, and it's going to turn those tables into, or those files into tables. So once they're there, those new tables are going to show up in our bronze lakehouse. In the lakehouse, we can explore the lakehouse just looking at the data and the folders within the lakehouse, or we can also use the SQL endpoint that's generated from Fabric. In Fabric, any lakehouse or warehouse has a SQL endpoint that allows you to explore the data using SQL code. So let's see if this is done. The Spark jobs are running, so as soon as they're done, I'll see new tables show up. I think they're still running. We'll come back to that in a moment. As soon as the sales header and sales line tables show up, they'll be part of our bronze layer.
And we noticed the icons changed from a shortcut into a table icon. So
Mhm.
if we look at the files before in bronze, they have that little triangle there is
Mhm.
means a shortcut. So now that I think the Spark has run, but we just need to refresh and should see it. Yeah,
So now the first table
there it
here,
is. Yeah.
there's my sales order table, and then I'll eventually get the sales line table as well to show up. And I can use the SQL endpoint to run queries against the data. So here I can do this thing called a visual query, which allows me to bring in a table like the sales headers, and I can work with the data visually. So I can use some tools within the user interface to write SQL code. So here I could say I want to know which fields do I want to keep. I'm just going to pick a few random fields to narrow it down. And then I'm going to filter, um, let's say I want to filter it down just to orders. As I do these steps, it's applying SQL code to my steps that I make here, and I can view the SQL code that it's generating. And then if I wanted to save it as a view, I can create a view that I can use later on. And this will create a view I can use downstream called sales orders. So it's a very powerful tool. You can write SQL code right in here against any tables you bring into Fabric and then create modified SQL objects in a low code experience. Okay, another tool you can use in Fabric is Dataflows. In Dataflows, you're using, just like in Power BI Desktop, you're using Power Query to modify the data. So in here, I can bring in data sources like the customer table, and I can apply code to the customer table, navigate to the customer table, choose which columns I want, rename the columns. And then what's different about Fabric is there's a data destination. I can choose where do I want to store the output of this data. And in this case, I'm using the bronze layer, and I'm going to transfer the tables into our next layer, which is the silver layer, where I've eliminated columns I don't want to have in the bronze layer, and I've renamed the columns to what I want them to be in the next layer. So if I go next to the silver layer is a modified data of it's a modified and cleaned up version of the data.
So we're using a data flow gen too
Mhm.
to refine the data from the bronze raw data into the cleansed silver data. So the data flow that you showed before is
Mhm.
bringing the data transformed into silver.
And then I have the ability to do the same sort of transforms here. If I want to create views or create other changes, I can do that within the silver layer. And then we'll do one more copy of the data to get it to the gold layer. So the next step, we're going to run a job that converts the silver into the gold. Here you can move data from one layer to the other by either copying a table outright. So if I want to take a table and copy the entire table, I can copy the entire table and save it into the gold layer. And this will actually create the table for me, or I can overwrite an existing table. The other option is that if I want to write a query or stored procedure, if I have the SQL knowledge to create my own views or queries or my own stored procedures, I can do any of those options within this pipeline. And when I run this pipeline, it's going to copy that data over and run a transfer. This pipeline can be parameterized to run multiple tables. So we typically would run a bigger pipeline to handle the transformation of the bronze data into this gold layer.
And it can also be configured for handling errors if
Mhm.
need be, the pipeline. Yeah.
So then I end up with my final layer, which is the gold layer. These are the fields and tables that are going to end up in my semantic model for the report. So I've got a fairly simplified gold layer. I've got the customer ledger, and the detailed customer ledger from BC that I'm going to use to write a customer statement report that I'm going to email out. So what I have here in the gold layer is the customer information, and then I've also got a list of emails. I'm going to email out um, a filtered view of the customer statement to myself and to Rosfon. We'll do this later on in the report. So the next step, once we have this report, once we want to build the semantic model, we're able to bring data in from one of our warehouses or lake houses. So in this case, we're building a semantic model on top of a gold warehouse where we can choose which tables get loaded into the semantic model. If I created a new table, I could bring it in here. So if I had a new table to create, I would run this pipeline, populate the gold layer, and we could bring more tables into our semantic model. I won't spend too much time on this. We're going to go to the report. So now I've created a very simple report where I've got an AR statement, I've got the open invoices, and any sort of recent payments or applied entries that I'm going to email to the customer. So to do this, I first have the report. This report is using the tables I defined in my gold layer. I have the customer table, the customer ledger, the detailed customer ledger. One of the key differences here in Fabric, now the data model can be developed within a browser. I don't have to use Power BI Desktop if I don't want to. So here I've got a semantic model where I've defined the relationships between the customer table, the customer ledger, and the detailed ledger. So this allows me to create a report. And then another feature of Fabric are dynamic subscriptions. So I can create a subscription where I define who's going to get the report dynamically. So I'm going to make a new subscription, and I'm going to use this option called dynamic per recipient. And what this allows me to do is to make a filtered version of the report where I um, use this news table email subscriptions to decide who's going to get a filtered copy of the report. So in this case, I want to get customer 20,000. Ross one's going to get customer 30,000. And we're going to email the report out with a filter. Then the email is going to be, what's the name of the subscription is going to be the name. So the recipients I'm going to enter manually from my data. Actually, I'll go back real quick. So we're going to email contact. The subject we're going to create, and I'll say this is a test. Then I can choose which pages I get. So in this case, I'm going to say page one of the report. You could also make that a parameter. And we're going to send the report as a PDF. And then we're going to add a filter. So we're going to say, for example, the customer number matches the parameter as set in the dynamics description. So it's going to match the customer number I'm set up for. And then we can choose the schedule of how often we want to run it. So we'll run this, let's say monthly, every 12th of the month, and we'll activate it. So once I set that up, I can then schedule it to run. So I'll say send now, and that's going to generate an email, and it's going to send a filtered view of the report to myself. So in this case, I would expect to get a filtered view of the report in my email. And then in this example, I get the report. It will send me a view of the report and a PDF. So some of these things could be done using Power Automate and Power BI, but this dynamic subscription allows you to set up these types of reports very simply using the dynamic subscriptions. And then we can go here and we can manage we can see all the different subscriptions.